Morning. It is Tuesday, the 31st of January. It's the last day of January. Can you believe it? I continue looking at the book of the prophet Isaiah, and today for morning prayer we read Isaiah chapter 52 verses 1 to 12. But I also want to pick up a thought that came to me, and for me there is a parallel from the New Testament reading, which is the book of Paul's letter to the church in Galatia. So Galatians chapter 4, and the verses are 12 to 20. Now it struck me that Isaiah, speaking the words of God, has challenged the people of Israel and the nations around them, challenged the people of Israel because they turned their back on God. They do not really understand who God was and is to them, and they permitted themselves to be led astray by the surrounding nations. And the consequence was the captivity of the nation of Judah, which consisted, as we've shared before, with the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, just those two tribes. The other 10 tribes, making up the 12 tribes of Judah, had been in the northern kingdom, and they had called themselves Israel, and they had long since been defeated by the Assyrians, and they were no more. So God challenges the people and says, why have you turned away from me? How is it, and I'm paraphrasing, how is it that I can help you when you don't acknowledge me and you don't answer me? And there is a wonderful sense in which that is true for us today. Here's my little rhetorical question, do we truly know what our faith means? Do we truly know who Jesus is? We call ourselves Christians and we even go to church on a Sunday. But have we ever sat down and, as it were, interrogated our faith? Or are we operating on some kind of superficial level? And so when things are going well and we like the preacher and the cushions in church are soft, the service is not too long, or the singing is nice, whatever, then we're very happy. But as soon as something goes wrong in our life and an illness comes our way or some little catastrophe, or we decide that the sermons are getting a little too long or not quite our cup of tea, and then we leave and we go somewhere else, or we just stop going altogether. Such a superficial interrogation of your faith that you can be led astray, literally, by something as little as that. And so this brings us then to the Paul's letter to Galatians, chapter 4, verses 12 to 20. And here Paul is challenging the people of Galatia because they had at one time had a really good relationship with him. And Paul's very clear in saying it's not with him per se, but it's with the Lord Jesus, that everything Paul does is to point to the Lord Jesus, not to himself. He doesn't try and get them to worship Jesus because of their relationship with Paul. So he's very clear that the relationship must be with Jesus. The implication is that they need to interrogate what Paul is saying to them, and they need to understand who this Jesus is. They need to develop their own relationship with the Lord Jesus. And coming up at about that same time, so when Paul writes this letter to Galatia, he's now challenging them because their faith has gone all lukewarm, and they are turning against Christ, effectively, and forgetting what Paul has said. And this was the result of a group of people called the Judaizers. They were Jewish people who had become Christians, but they thought that Christianity was really just a somewhat more specific form of Judaism. And so for them, if you wanted to be a Christian, you had to first be a Jew, which means principally to be circumcised, if you're a man, and then to follow all the laws of Judaism. And so Paul was saying, but that's not the case. We are not saved by law, we are saved by grace. And God gave the law to guide the Jews and to open their eyes to the Lord Jesus. But the law was just a pointer, it was just a vehicle to get there. As important as it was and remains, it is to point towards the Lord Jesus. And these people had taken Jesus and made him subservient to the law. And you saw that happening with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And so Paul is challenging the people. But it struck me that the people did not have a good relationship with the Lord Jesus. They listened to what Paul said. They rather liked what Paul said. Paul, in a sense, became their God and their idol, and they would, with their mouths, worship the Lord Jesus, but in their hearts, they actually had no real idea of who he was. And so when someone else came with a slightly different message, which sort of appealed to something that hearkened them back to the past, they simply dropped Paul, as it were, and followed these Judaizers. And I think for many of us in this modern world, we do something similar. We don't necessarily become Jews to become Christians, although I have met some who seem to do that. But we are so easily led astray by clever preachers. And those clever preachers really aren't lifting up the Lord Jesus first and foremost. They're lifting up themselves and the miracles that they sell to you. So folks, develop your relationship with the Lord Jesus, interrogate your faith, really learn who Jesus is and what he means to you and what that means you need to do in your life to grow yourself further. Then you will be less likely. In fact, at some point one could say if you have a good, deep enough faith, it's impossible for them to lead you astray from the Lord Jesus, because you would have tasted of the fruits of that relationship. And when someone else comes with something else, might look sweet on the outside, but as you begin to think about and partake of it, you realize it's bitter, it's evil, this is not of God. But if we don't have a relationship with the Lord Jesus, a proper relationship, and we don't know what we really believe, then we are easily led astray. So develop your relationship with the Lord. How do you do that? Well, spend time with God in his word and in prayer, in a quiet time. Try and do that daily. Just reflect and think. Find good, godly people. Not good speakers, but good, godly people, and learn from them. Folks, something to think about, something to practice. We'll chat again tomorrow. God bless.